My name is Terri Lawson. I am 52 years old and a lieutenant general in the United States Army. I have spent more than 3 decades in uniform, across deployments and commands, in moments when silence was as dangerous as gunfire. But nothing prepared me for what happened at my father's memorial service. The church was filled with the deep hum of the organ. The air was heavy with incense and grief. Rows of people in dark suits shifted in their seats, some holding folded tissues, others clasping hands. My father's photo sat on the altar, his uniform crisp in the frame, his medals catching the candlelight. He was a Marine through and through, a man who taught me that honor was not something given. It was something you defended. I sat in the front pew, my husband Mark beside me. Mark is a 4-star admiral in the United States Navy and currently serves in the United States Special Operations Command. We had agreed to keep the day solemn. No politics, no disputes. Just remembering my father. Then I felt it. A small, deliberate movement under the pew. Mark's hand slid a phone into mine, hidden from view. I looked down. One message lit up the screen, stark and simple. "Don't react. Your sister is recording you." My pulse slowed, not quickened. Years of training taught me that reaction is the enemy's currency. I let my eyes drift back to the altar, my face still, my lips holding the faint trace of a smile. I shifted my thumb across the phone screen and typed a single word. Raven. The word was not random. It was a code we had agreed on, one that would turn quiet observation into swift action. 10 seconds later, I heard the scrape of chair legs on hardwood. 8 men and women, dressed like ordinary mourners, rose from scattered seats across the sanctuary. No one in that room knew they were Mark's SEAL team. Disguised as guests, they moved with unshakable precision, splitting into pairs, scanning faces, confiscating devices. No one raised their voice, no one argued. The sound of the organ continued as if nothing had changed. From the corner of my vision, I saw Rachel, my older sister, freeze. The phone she had been angling toward me lowered in her hand. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes flicked from me to Mark and back again, searching for understanding, maybe for a way out. And in that moment, I knew this was not just about today. Something deeper was running under the surface, something that had been building for years. Why would my sister want to catch me off guard in the middle of our father's memorial? Why turn a day of remembrance into a staged spectacle? Those questions burned quietly as the SEAL team moved. And I promised myself, right there in that pew, that I would find the answers. Rachel tried to smile as a SEAL in a black suit took her phone with a polite nod. She adjusted her scarf, leaned toward the woman next to her, whispered something I could not hear. She looked like someone trying to pretend she had not just been caught. I had seen that look before. In my 20s, just after I was commissioned, she told people I had joined the Army because I could not handle civilian life. At family dinners, she would raise her glass and say things like, "To Terri, Dad's favorite," with that half smile that made it sound like a compliment but landed like a jab. My father used to tell me, not every traitor stands on the other side of the battlefield. At the time, I thought he meant politics, foreign adversaries. I did not realize he also meant blood could turn on you without crossing an ocean. Now, watching Rachel tilt her head toward the altar, I could feel the shape of her intentions, even without hearing a word. This was not just sibling rivalry. It was something calculated, something she thought she could hide in the folds of grief. Mark did not look at me. He kept his eyes forward, his hands folded. That was how I knew the situation was bigger than a petty stunt. If he had quietly activated the SEAL team, it meant he already had pieces of the puzzle I had not yet seen. As the pastor began to speak, I kept my breathing even, my posture unbroken. In the Army, you learn that the battle is rarely where the bullets fly first. It starts in the moments when you are tested to stay still while everything in you demands motion. 3 days before the memorial, I had been in my father's study. The room smelled of cedar and old paper. I was packing some of his personal effects when I found a crumpled paper bag in the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside was his Purple Heart, the one he had earned in Vietnam. I held it in my palm. I was 10 years old the day he placed it there for the first time, telling me, "This is not for the wound. It is for the choice to keep going." That memory hit me harder than I expected. Later that night, Mark came into the kitchen with the kind of face that meant bad news. He had received intel from someone inside Rachel's circle. She had hired people to attend the memorial with one job: film me reacting. If I cried too hard, if I showed anger, if I confronted her, those clips would be edited, turned into a portrait of someone unstable. She planned to use it to challenge my share of our father's estate, and worse, to derail my pending nomination to the National Security Council. It was not just about money. It was about dismantling everything I had built. That was when we agreed on the code word. That was when we decided that if Rachel wanted a performance, she would get one. Just not the one she had scripted. After the memorial, Mark and I did not speak about what had happened until we were back home with the doors locked. We had both learned in our respective careers that timing mattered. Sometimes the silence immediately after an event was the best way to protect the truth from too many ears. In the living room, he handed me a folder. Inside were still images, phone numbers, and short notes scribbled in his handwriting. These were not random. Each one linked to a person who had attended the service, and each was marked with a discrete symbol that told me how much of a threat they might be. Mark had tapped into the intelligence channels available to him as part of SOCOM. It was not the kind of favor you asked lightly. His team had quietly followed threads from Rachel's phone records and financial transactions, and the picture was becoming clearer with every connection. The names meant little to me at first, but one stopped me cold: Colonel David Mercer. The last time I saw Mercer was 5 years ago, across a conference table at Fort Bragg. He had been assigned to a joint special projects unit, one I was overseeing. Brilliant on paper, reckless in practice. He had ignored operational protocols in a way that could have gotten people killed. I pulled him from the assignment and made sure the record reflected why. It had been one of the most unpopular decisions of my career, but necessary. Now his name sat in a file connected to my sister, not as a distant acquaintance, but as a business partner in a consultancy Rachel had formed 2 years ago. I set the file down and took a slow breath. In the Army, we are trained to see the battlefield not just as it is, but as it will be. I could already see the shape of this one forming. Rachel had not simply hired strangers to record me. She had aligned herself with someone who had a reason to want me discredited. Someone who understood how to play a long game and use perception as a weapon. Mark studied my face. "I know you want to go to her," he said, "but that's exactly what they expect." He was right. The instinct to confront was strong. In the military, decisive action is drilled into us. But this was not a mission with a defined theater and clear objectives. This was personal warfare, which made it more dangerous. Every move I made would be scrutinized. Every reaction potentially fed into whatever narrative they were building. I told him I wanted more than names. I wanted patterns. People leave trails when they think they are clever. Meetings in the same location, payments through layered accounts, conversations that sound casual until you know the context. Over the next week, Mark's contacts fed us pieces. One showed Mercer and Rachel meeting in a corner booth at a restaurant near the courthouse. Another traced a payment from Rachel's account to a shell company, then to a private investigator who specialized in emotional surveillance. I kept all of it organized in a binder on my desk, each page a map of their miscalculations. I refused to let anger lead. Anger made noise, and noise made mistakes. My father used to tell me that you did not win battles by shouting across the field. You won by making sure the other side never saw you coming. At night, I would flip through the binder, tracing lines between names, places, and dates. Every connection was another knot in the net I would eventually close around them, and every time I saw Mercer's name, I reminded myself that revenge was not the goal. The goal was to make sure they could never touch my career, my family, or my father's honor again. The pieces were falling into place. All I needed was patience, and the certainty that in the end, the truth would not just come out. It would stand so plainly in the open that even Rachel would have to face it. 2 days after the memorial, I drove to Rachel's house with a casserole. It was the kind of gesture our father would have insisted on. I rang the bell and set my shoulders. I had no intention of arguing. The visit would be brief and watchful. Rachel was not home. Her daughter, Lily, opened the door with a quick smile. She was 9 and earnest. The babysitter called from the kitchen that Rachel had stepped out. She waved me in and returned to a sink of dishes. Lily tugged my sleeve. "Aunt Terri, come see what I made." She led me to the dining table where paper crowns lay in a row. One was purple with silver stars. Purple always brings my father to mind. I placed it on her head. "Regal," I said. She laughed and spun. We colored quietly. Lily drew a medal that looked like an oval with a ribbon. She shaded it purple. "Is this Grandpa's heart medal?" she asked. "The one for being brave and hurt at the same time?" "Yes," I said. "It is called a Purple Heart." She nodded, then tilted her head the way children do when they repeat cargo too heavy for them. "Mom says you are going to sell all of Grandpa's medals." She said it the way a child asks about ice cream after dinner. Heat rose in my chest. Not rage, something heavier. I set the marker down. The room clicked into high focus. The hum of the refrigerator, the clink of a spoon, Lily's small breath waiting for my answer. Weaponized innocence does not arrive with sirens. It arrives with wide eyes and open questions. I crouched so we were eye level. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone even. "Medals are not things I sell. They are things I protect. Your grandpa gave his country more than most people will ever understand. Those medals belong to the story of who he was." She frowned. "Then why would Mom say that?" "Sometimes grown-ups speak from hurt," I said. "Sometimes they are mistaken." I did not add that sometimes grown-ups use children to deliver cuts that leave bigger scars. Lily traced the purple medal with her finger. "Can you show me the real one sometime?" "Yes," I said. "I can show you, and I can tell you how he earned it." The babysitter called that Rachel had texted. She would be back in 10 minutes. I helped Lily glue a ribbon to the paper medal. It felt like a promise. When I left, I did not slam doors or call Mark. I put the empty pan on the passenger seat and sat with my hands on the wheel. The insult was specific. It did not bruise only my pride, it struck at my father's honor. I could taste metal at the back of my tongue. On the drive home, I called an archivist at the Army Heritage and Education Center. I arranged temporary custody paperwork so the medals could be cataloged, photographed, and stored in a climate-controlled vault. If Rachel wanted the story to be that I would sell them, the record would say otherwise. Facts are calmer than rumors. They endure. Back at my desk, I opened the binder and drew a line between Rachel's name and Mercer's. I added a note in red ink. Leverage through the child, narrative contamination. I breathed in for 4 counts and out for 6. I would not let them draft Lily into their war. I would not let them turn a child into a weapon against her own history, ever. The family meeting was held at my uncle's house, under the pretense of discussing memorial donations. The living room smelled of coffee and furniture polish, the kind of scent that should have signaled comfort. Instead, it felt like a stage set for something else. Rachel sat across from me, legs crossed, a porcelain cup balanced in her hand. She waited until the room quieted, until all eyes could swing her way, and then she smiled the kind of smile that wasn't about joy. "You know," she said lightly, "Terry's always been great at ordering soldiers around. But in real life, outside the army, I'm not sure she'd know what to do with herself." It was a simple sentence, dressed as a joke, but I felt the shift in the air. A couple of cousins chuckled nervously. My aunt looked down at her lap. The words were meant to land and stay, to plant a seed that would grow in the minds of everyone present. I set my coffee down without a sound. My posture didn't change, but I let my eyes meet Mark's across the room. His jaw tightened just enough for me to see, and in that silent exchange, we both understood. This was not an isolated remark. This was the opening volley in something bigger. I could have responded. Years of command had taught me how to cut through subtext with precision. But battles chosen in anger are rarely won in strategy. Instead, I let the silence do its work. People remember who stayed calm when provoked. They also remember who threw the first stone. Rachel turned her head toward another relative, as if the comment had been a passing thought, already forgotten. But I caught the quick glance she shot me from the corner of her eye. She was checking for damage. I gave her none. The meeting moved on to donation logistics, numbers, and bank accounts. But I was no longer listening. In my mind, I added another line to the binder at home. Public undermining attempt. Witness count 12. Mark's gaze stayed steady on me until the meeting ended. No words passed between us on the drive home. We didn't need them. The war had already started. It simply hadn't been announced yet. The day after the family meeting, Mark slid an unmarked envelope across the kitchen counter. He didn't speak until I had broken the seal and pulled out a small flash drive. "This came in last night," he said. One of the seals embedded at the memorial picked it up without drawing attention. I had it decrypted before breakfast. I walked to my study, closed the door, and plugged the drive into my laptop. The file list was short: one audio file, time-stamped 2 hours before the memorial service had started. My fingers hovered over the trackpad for a moment before I clicked play. The sound was muffled at first. A clink of silverware, low voices in the background, the kind of ambient noise you'd hear in a hotel lounge. Then a voice I knew better than my own rose above the rest. Rachel's. "Just get the moment," she was saying, her tone flat, businesslike. "I don't care if she's crying or snapping at someone. Just get the moment she loses control." There was a pause, then the faint sound of money sliding across a table. A male voice, unfamiliar, answered, "Understood. One clean shot is all it takes." Rachel's voice again, sharper this time. "Exactly. People don't remember the whole story. They remember the image you give them. I want them to see her as unstable. The rest will take care of itself." I stopped the playback and leaned back in my chair. The air in the room felt heavier, as if the walls had moved closer. I replayed the clip, this time with my eyes closed. I wanted every inflection burned into my memory, every pause mapped. The seal who'd captured it had been sitting at a table diagonally behind them, his phone camera lens disguised as a shirt button, a directional mic sewn into his cuff. The quality was pristine, the conversation was damning. Mark had been right. This wasn't improvised malice. Rachel had planned the attack carefully enough to hire someone with surveillance skills. It wasn't just about the memorial or the estate. This was about building a narrative she could wield in every circle we shared: family, professional, public. I pulled out my binder and added a new tab: direct transactions. I printed the transcript, noting the timestamp, location, and voice IDs. Every detail would matter later, not just for court but for the court of public opinion. Still, part of me hesitated. Hearing her voice stripped away the thin hope I'd been carrying, that this was a misunderstanding, that grief had twisted her judgment only for a moment. No, this was calculated, deliberate. She had chosen her weapon, and it was me. I sent a secure copy of the file to our attorney with the subject line: Category A Evidence, Immediate Review. Then I encrypted the original, stored it in a separate cloud account Rachel could never access, and physically locked the drive in my safe. When I stepped back into the kitchen, Mark was leaning against the counter, arms folded. "She's not just playing dirty," I said. "She's trying to rewrite who I am." He nodded once. "Then we'll make sure her version never makes it past her lips." That night, I listened to the recording again alone. Not because I needed to, but because it was a reminder. In my line of work, intelligence gathering isn't just about catching the enemy. It's about understanding their intent. Rachel had given me that for free, and I intended to use it until the last word turned back on her. After securing the audio file in the safe, I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the binder without turning a page. My mind drifted, not to the evidence itself, but to where this had all begun. The roots of betrayal rarely grow overnight. They take years, even decades, to anchor themselves. I was 21 the summer I told my father I intended to join the army. We were in the backyard, under the shade of the maple tree he'd planted the day Rachel was born. He was cleaning his old service rifle, his hands steady despite the arthritis already creeping into his knuckles. Rachel had come outside carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She set them down on the patio table and sat across from him. "Tell her she's making a mistake," she said, without looking at me. My father didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the barrel, running the cloth through with a precision that came from years of habit. Finally, he glanced at her. "Your sister has made up her mind." Rachel folded her arms. "She doesn't know what she's getting into. It's not like school or a summer job. This changes everything. It's dangerous. It's..." She trailed off, as if the word she wanted was too sharp to throw. I opened my mouth, but my father raised his hand, palm toward me, a silent request to let him handle it. "Rachel," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're strong. You always have been. But your sister, she has an iron will. And sometimes, that's what's needed more than anything else. The compliment landed on me like a badge, but I didn't miss the way Rachel's expression shifted. It wasn't just disagreement, it was something cooler, a flicker in her eyes that I couldn't name at the time. She pushed her chair back with a scrape. "Fine," she said, standing. "But don't come to me when it all goes wrong." She walked inside, letting the screen door slam shut. My father sighed and returned to the rifle. "You can't expect everyone to understand why you choose the path you do," he said. "But you have to be ready for the weight that comes with it." At the time, I thought he meant the weight of command, of deployments, of the uniform itself. Only years later did I realize he'd been warning me about another kind of weight, the strain that success can place on relationships, especially when one person feels left behind. That day under the maple tree, my father had given me his blessing, but in doing so, he had also, without meaning to, planted a seed in Rachel. Not of malice, not yet, but of comparison, and comparison, left unchecked, grows into resentment. Sitting at my desk now, decades later, I could see the through line clearly. Every jab, every rumor, every carefully placed word, meant to undermine me. It all traced back to moments like that. My father's praise had been honest, but it had split something between us that never truly healed. The irony was bitter. He had told me I had an iron will. What he didn't say was that one day I would need every ounce of it, not to face a battlefield abroad, but to survive the one waiting for me at home. 2 evenings after listening to the audio of Rachel's arrangement, I received an unexpected call. The number wasn't in my contacts, but the voice on the other end was instantly familiar. "Terri, it's Dana Whitfield. We went to high school together, and I've stayed in touch with Rachel over the years." Her tone carried hesitation, like she was weighing each word. She asked if we could meet in person. We agreed on a small coffee shop off the main road, quiet enough for privacy, public enough to feel neutral. When I arrived, Donna was already there, stirring a cup she hadn't tasted. She looked up and gave a tentative smile. "I don't know if I should be here," she began, "but I think you need to understand something about your sister." I said nothing, letting her find her rhythm. "She always admired you," Dana said. "Back when you got into West Point, she told everyone how proud she was. But things shifted, especially after your father's will came out. I think she felt like she was invisible, like you were the only one he saw." The words settled between us. It wasn't news that the estate had been divided unevenly. My share was larger, tied to the responsibility of maintaining our father's military memorabilia and property. It had been his decision, explained to both of us before his passing. I'd assumed Rachel had accepted it, even if she wasn't thrilled. Clearly, I had been wrong. Dana leaned forward, lowering her voice. "It's not just the money. She told me once that when he gave you that Purple Heart to safeguard, she realized he was trusting you with parts of him he'd never given her. She couldn't get past it." I felt the edges of my binder in my mind, each page of evidence, each calculated move she'd made against me. Those were acts of strategy, but beneath them was something more personal, a wound she'd been carrying long before the memorial. Long before Mercer, long before she'd ever thought to hire someone to catch me off guard. Dana glanced toward the door, as if worried Rachel might walk in. "I'm not defending what she's doing," she said. "But I think you should know, it's not just about tearing you down. It's about her trying to fill a space she's convinced she'll never have." I thanked her and paid for her coffee before she could protest. On the drive home, the city lights blurred in the windshield. This wasn't just about money or career sabotage. It was about a fracture that had been there since we were young, a split my father never intended but had never fully seen. That didn't excuse her actions, but it reframed the battlefield. I was no longer fighting just an enemy. I was navigating the fallout of a lifetime of comparison. And that made the path forward both clearer and far more complicated. The moment the SEAL team rose from their seats in the chapel, the air changed. It wasn't loud, no shouts, no barked orders. But the shift in presence was unmistakable. Rows of solemn faces, once blending into the grief-filled crowd, now moved with a purpose that no civilian could quite place. Rachel froze mid-swipe on her phone, her eyes darting to the men and women who were suddenly no longer guests. Their movements were precise, almost reverent as they fanned out, each taking a different section of the chapel. Not a single camera flash went off. Not a single gasp broke the stillness. Only the sound of polished shoes against the wooden floor and the faint creak of pews as they passed. I kept my gaze fixed on the framed photograph of my father at the altar. The black and white portrait captured him in uniform. Jaw set, eyes focused forward, as if even in death, he was still watching over the room. My phone, still in my lap, was warm from the single word I had texted. Raven. I didn't need to look at Mark. I could feel him a few rows back, the calm center of a storm he had choreographed weeks earlier. 2 weeks before the memorial, in the quiet of our kitchen, he had laid it out for me. She'll try something, he said, pouring coffee into my mug. And if she does, we need to make sure she's the one exposed, not you. I'd bristled at first. Mark, this is my father's memorial. It's supposed to be about him, not— It will be, he interrupted, his tone measured. But you need to understand, Rachel isn't going to care about the sanctity of the moment. She'll see it as an opportunity. We take that away from her. He showed me a diagram, rows of seating, shaded zones for angles of visibility, notes on who would sit where. Every member of the SEAL team would attend in civilian clothes, blending in as friends of friends, distant relatives, or even members of the clergy. Their task wasn't to intimidate. It was to quietly neutralize any attempt to record, manipulate, or distort what happened that day. I had looked at the plan and asked, and if she does nothing? Mark had met my eyes. Then they sit there and mourn your father alongside everyone else. No one ever knows. That was the thing about Mark. His operations weren't just about force. They were about precision, about allowing for every outcome without drawing unnecessary blood. In his world, the most effective takedowns often happened without a single shot fired. Back in the chapel, I watched as one SEAL gently approached the guest seated next to Rachel. An older man I didn't recognize, and extended a hand. The man, confused, passed over a small recording device without argument. Another team member moved down the side aisle, leaning towards someone in the third pew. A phone was handed over almost instantly. It was all done with that same cold courtesy Mark had emphasized. No accusations. No scenes. Just a silent, methodical removal of weapons. Though here, the weapons were digital. Rachel's phone was the last to go. She resisted, a tight smile plastered on her face as she tried to keep the device close. But the woman who took it, a SEAL with short blonde hair and a black blazer, was relentless in her calm. She whispered something I couldn't hear, and Rachel's hand slowly opened. From my seat, I caught Rachel's eyes. They were wide, searching, her mouth slightly open. For a fraction of a second, I thought I saw the flicker of a memory, maybe of another time she'd been outmaneuvered, maybe of the maple tree conversation with our father years ago. I didn't give her more than a glance. My attention returned to the altar, to the folded flag resting in the center. The mission was underway, and for now, my role was simple: to sit still, say nothing, and let the silence do its work. The chapel had not yet settled when the murmurs began. At first they were whispers, a rustle of confusion at the sight of strangers collecting devices, the subtle shifting of bodies as people tried to piece together what had just happened. But then the whispers sharpened into voices, and those voices carried. An older cousin, one I hadn't seen in years, stood from the back row, his face red with indignation. "Terri, what on earth was that?" His voice cracked through the quiet like a splintering board. "This is your father's memorial, not some military stunt." Others joined in, though softer, their words layered with accusation. "Disrespectful. Completely unnecessary. She's turning this into a spectacle." I stayed seated, my back straight, my eyes still on the photograph at the altar. I let their words wash over me like rain against a window, present but not penetrating. Finally, I turned my head, meeting my cousin's glare with the calm precision I'd been trained to wield. "It wasn't me who made a scene," I said, my voice even, every syllable clear. "It was the truth." And the truth stood up on its own. The sentence hung there, suspended in the air. A woman in the third row, my aunt, Rachel's godmother, shifted in her seat. "Terri, you could have handled this another time," she said gently, though her eyes carried the weight of judgment. "Your father would have wanted peace today." Peace. The word pressed against me like a cold hand. My father had spent his life in service to a country where peace was often a delicate illusion. earned, defended, and protected through the quiet work of people who never got credit. He'd taught me that peace wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the result of handling conflict before it could fester. I took a slow breath. My father wanted the truth honored, I replied. And if that meant revealing what was being done here, in his name, then today is exactly the right day. The reaction split the room. Some nodded, their expressions hardening with understanding. Others shook their heads, their lips pressed thin, unwilling to accept that the sanctity of the service had already been compromised long before the SEAL team moved. Rachel sat frozen, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes locked on me. She didn't speak, not yet. But I could feel the heat of her fury from across the aisle, could almost hear the silent accusations forming in her mind. From the corner of my vision, I caught sight of Mark. He remained in his seat, still as stone, his gaze flicking between me and the growing pockets of dissent. He knew, as I did, that once a truth is shown, people will react in one of two ways. They'll either cling to the comfort of what they believed before, or they'll step into the discomfort of seeing things as they are. Neither reaction is wrong, but both come with consequences. I faced forward again, my focus returning to the folded flag at the altar. My father had carried that flag into 2 combat zones and brought it home untouched. Today, it felt heavier than any weapon I had ever held. The murmurs didn't stop. If anything, they deepened, creating 2 distinct undercurrents in the room, one of quiet support, the other of simmering disapproval. And as I sat there, hands folded, posture unshaken, I knew this wasn't just a single battle in a family feud. This was the opening line of a war that had been building for years, and today, the front line had moved into full view. Rachel stood slowly, smoothing the skirt of her black dress, as if the fabric itself were the only thing worth straightening. The room quieted, watching her like they were expecting an apology, or at least a parting shot. But she said nothing. She walked toward the aisle, her heels clicking against the polished wooden floor, measured, deliberate, like every step was part of a performance she knew the audience would remember. When she passed me, she didn't look down or away, her eyes locked on mine, holding there just long enough for me to see it clearly. Not fear, not shame, but challenge. It wasn't the kind of challenge you could diffuse with words. It was the kind you had to answer, one way or another. I kept my face still, my breathing steady, the way I'd been trained in interrogation rooms when someone was trying to push me into a mistake. Mark didn't move beside me, but I felt the subtle shift in his posture, like he'd just marked the moment in his mental timeline of this war. Rachel reached the chapel doors, opened them without a glance back, and stepped into the cold afternoon light. There was no slam, no dramatic exit, just the quiet click of the door settling back into place. But that sound carried more weight than a shouted threat. It was her way of saying, "I'm not finished." The service continued, but the air in the room had changed. Conversations afterward were clipped and polite, as if everyone knew they were standing in the middle of something much larger than a family disagreement. I shook hands, accepted condolences, and thanked people for coming, all while feeling Rachel's look still imprinted behind my eyes. It was the look of someone who had just lost a battle, but believed she could still win the war. When Mark and I finally stepped outside, the winter air bit at my skin. But it wasn't the cold that made me shiver. It was the certainty, etched as clear as her stare, that Rachel's next move would be calculated, personal, and coming soon. And I would be ready. It started with one name. The former Army officer I had flagged from Mark's intel report, someone I'd removed from a joint operation years ago for falsifying readiness logs, was now on Rachel's contact list. That alone was suspicious, but what caught my attention was who he was working with now. Mark's team had traced a series of encrypted messages from him to a law firm in Arlington. At first glance, it looked like a standard mid-tier practice, the kind you'd see in any downtown building with beige walls and polite receptionists. But the deeper we dug, the more it reeked of something else entirely. These lawyers weren't just in courtrooms. They were in archives, HR offices, and digital record systems. Their specialty wasn't defending clients. It was dismantling people. They built careers out of planting doubts in the credibility of political rivals, corporate leaders, and military officers. The pattern was always the same. First, they'd dig up something small and true, an offhand remark, a minor procedural error. Then they'd inflate it, wrap it in manufactured context, and feed it to the right people until the damage was irreversible. If they couldn't find anything, they'd quietly create it. Altered documents, anonymous complaints, whispers to the press. And now, they were working with my sister. It clicked then. The recording stunt at my father's memorial wasn't random. It was an opening shot. The real objective was far bigger. If they could get footage of me losing control in public, they could frame it as instability, leak it to the right channels, and let the rumor mill erode my standing in the Army. That would do more than wound my career. It would strip my security clearance, dismantle years of operational trust, and make me radioactive to every future assignment. Rachel wasn't just trying to embarrass me, she was trying to erase me. I sat at the dining table that night with the files spread out before me, names, timelines, connections drawn in ink. Mark stood at the counter, his arms folded, watching me think. "They've been doing this for a long time," I said finally. "And they're good at it," he replied, "which means we can't just react. We have to own the timing." I thought about my father's words years ago, "Not every enemy wears a uniform." Looking at the web of connections, I realized this wasn't just Rachel's fight anymore. She had plugged herself into something that had dismantled far stronger people than me. But what she didn't understand was that I'd spent my career operating in the shadows, learning how networks fall apart when you pull the right thread. The problem was, the right thread might also be family. 3 days after Mark traced the law firm's ties, the hit landed. I was midway through reviewing a readiness report when my phone buzzed. 3 rapid notifications, all from different friends. Each had sent the same thing, a link to a viral video. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. The clip was only 15 seconds. It showed me in a dimly lit room, holding my father's Purple Heart. My face was unreadable, then hard cut, to me tossing it into a trash bin. The camera angle shifted just enough to catch the sound of metal clinking against the can's rim. The audio was muffled, but over it came my voice, clear enough to make anyone believe, "It's just a piece of metal." I froze. I knew exactly what they'd done. The first half was from a year ago, when I had been cataloging my father's military memorabilia for safekeeping. I'd been holding the metal over a box, not a trash can. The second half, me dropping something, was from an unrelated charity cleanup where I'd thrown away a dented lamp. They'd stitched them together, cleaned the audio, and dropped in words I had never spoken. By the time I reached the end of the clip, the view count was already climbing, 20,000, then 22. The hashtags told me everything about how it was spreading. Her disrespect, ihak, stolen valor, prasa, Lawson disgrace. I called Mark. He had already seen it. "It's staged," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "Of course it is," he replied. "But that's not the point. The point is, they've chosen the battlefield." And they had. The comment section was a war zone. Some called for my resignation. Others defended me, insisting it was a smear. Old acquaintances chimed in, some with support, others with thinly veiled judgment. My inbox filled with journalists requesting statements, military blogs posting think pieces about the decay of honor and leadership. The speed of it wasn't natural. Mark's cyber team confirmed the clip had been seeded by accounts tied back to the same law firm in Arlington. The network was amplifying it with bot traffic to make it trend. I sat back in my chair, reading the comments, my pulse steady but my jaw tight. This wasn't just an attack on me, it was an attack on my father's memory. They had weaponized not only his metal, but the values it represented. For a moment, the temptation to fire back publicly burned hot in my chest. One statement, one clear explanation, and I could dismantle the lie. But then I remembered, these people weren't looking for truth. They were looking for spectacle. If I reacted now, they'd have exactly what they wanted. So instead, I closed the video, I took a breath, and I began planning what came next. Because if they wanted a battlefield, I'd make sure it was one I chose. That night, I stopped reading the comments and opened the binder instead. If they wanted a theater, I would choose the stage and the lighting. I called our attorney, then Mark. We agreed on a single goal: reveal the whole chain of manipulation in one controlled setting, with independent witnesses and documented provenance. The perfect venue came to mind. The County Veterans Hall was hosting a public ceremony to dedicate a new display for local service members. My father's name was already engraved on the bronze plate. The organizers had asked me to say a few words. I had considered declining after the smear video. Now it was where I needed to stand. I built the presentation like an op order. Phase 1. Authenticate. I arranged for the Army Heritage and Education Center to deliver certified photographs of every medal and citation, including archival scans of my father's service records. A museum registrar agreed to attend with custody receipts. Her testimony would corroborate the chain of care. Phase 2. Expose. Mark's team prepared the original footage from the cataloging day and the charity cleanup. Frame-by-frame comparisons would show the cut lines and mismatched metadata. An audio spectrogram would reveal spliced phrases. The hotel lounge security timecode would anchor the payment. File hashes would verify integrity for anyone willing to look. Phase 3. Protect. Our attorney filed preservation notices and sought a temporary injunction to halt further distribution of the doctored clip. I rehearsed the speech in my kitchen, not for drama, but for clarity. I would not accuse first. I would honor my father, define the facts, then let the audience watch the contrast on the screen. Words would be few, the evidence would speak. I printed handouts with QR codes linking to notarized files. Anyone could verify them on their own time. Mark handled security discreetly, no uniforms, no intimidation. Only quiet eyes in the crowd, ready to escort anyone who tried to disrupt. The goal was not humiliation, it was daylight. A retired judge agreed to sit in the front row as a neutral observer. 2 local reporters would attend without cameras. Their notebooks would be enough. The night before the event, Dana texted, "Rachel knows something is coming. She looks terrified and furious." I thanked her, then I wrote a final note on a yellow card I planned to keep in my pocket. It held my father's sentence. Not every traitor stands on the other side of the battlefield. I slid the card behind the program. It steadied my hands. At dawn, I drove to the hall with the binder on the passenger seat. The Purple Heart was already secured in the museum case. I touched the glass with my fingertips. The metal caught the light. It looked like it was breathing. Whatever happened on that stage, my father's honor would not be a prop. It would be the standard I raised. I was ready to return fire, not with anger, but with precision. Publicly. The Veterans Hall event was scheduled for the weekend, but the law moved first. On Thursday morning, I entered the county courthouse with my attorney, Miss Hayes. We sat at the petitioner's table. Across the aisle, Rachel adjusted a silk scarf and avoided my eyes. The judge entered. The clerk called our case. Hayes rose and began with chain of custody. She placed a sealed evidence bag on the table, then projected a timeline onto the courtroom screen. Exhibit A, the audio recorded in the hotel lounge before the memorial. We listened to Rachel's voice instruct a paid surrogate to capture the moment I lose control. No narration, only her words. Exhibit B, the devices collected at the memorial under written consent forms. Serial numbers matched the forms. One phone held a drafted caption, proof she cracked. Another contained a message thread with timestamps aligned to the hotel audio. Hayes did not grandstand. She walked the judge through metadata line by line. Times, tags, versions, the small fingerprints people forget. Exhibit C, the viral clip of me dropping a medal into a bin, followed by the original sources from the cataloging day and the charity cleanup. A forensic analyst took the stand and explained compression artifacts and spectral anomalies. He showed how my supposed sentence had been stitched from unrelated words, lifted from older interviews. The room stayed quiet except for his steady voice and the hum of the projector. Exhibit D, museum receipts and custody logs from the Army Heritage and Education Center, proving that my father's medals had been in secure storage before the smear appeared. The registrar testified that the Purple Heart had not left the vault in months. Facts withdraw oxygen from lies. The air in the courtroom thinned as she spoke. Finally, Exhibit E, the money. Hayes displayed transfers from Rachel's account into a shell corporation, then outbound payments to a private investigation firm that shared a suite with the Arlington law practice. Mercer's consultancy received 3 payments labeled strategy packages. The amounts were modest, but the regularity and phrasing were careful, never innocent. The judge leaned forward. He asked precise questions: dates, handlers, who pressed record, and when. Hayes answered each without flourish. When the court finished with the analyst and the registrar, the judge turned to Rachel's counsel. Objections came, then fell away for lack of weight. The record had already decided most of the argument. We paused while the clerk reshuffled exhibits. Papers rustled. The fluorescent lights buzzed. That was when I felt a light tug at my sleeve. Rachel had leaned toward the rail just enough that only I could hear. "I only wanted Dad to look at me the way he looked at you," she whispered. "Just once." I did not answer. My throat tightened. Not with anger, but with a grief that came too late to change anything. A lifetime of comparisons had become a machine. It had ground us both down. I remembered the maple tree behind our childhood home, the day he told us strength takes different shapes. Rachel with her quick wit and charm, me with stubborn resolve. He never meant to divide us, yet his faith in me became a wedge neither of us learned to lift. The judge called us back to order. Hayes closed with one sentence: "The facts show a deliberate campaign to fabricate instability and to defame a serving officer while exploiting the confusion for advantage." She sat. No pointed finger. No raised voice. In the hallway, reporters waited near the elevators. I passed without comment. Rachel emerged a minute later, her attorney whispering into her ear. Our eyes met for a heartbeat. No victory in mine, and none in hers. Only the weight of a family that carried its quarrels into public, because it could not resolve them at the kitchen table. The hearing ended without a ruling. The judge took the matter under advisement and set preservation and restraint orders for the afternoon. I sat on a wooden bench and placed my hand over my chest, where the Purple Heart would rest if I were my father. Honor is not a medal, it is a posture. I kept it. 2 days after the hearing, the Veterans Hall filled with conversation and the clink of chairs. Flags lined the walls. A bronze plaque with my father's name waited under a velvet cover. I signed the program at the podium. My notes were short. The evidence would carry the weight. Mark kept to the back with 2 plainclothes security observers. The museum registrar sat in the front row, and a retired judge settled beside her, pen poised. I stepped to the microphone and let the room quiet on its own. I spoke first about service. I said a name is stitched to a uniform, but honor is stitched to a life. Then I invited the registrar to confirm custody of my father's medals. She described the vault, the logs, the handling rules. When she finished, I nodded to the AV tech. The screen lit with the hotel lounge still. I kept my voice minimal. This is a recording captured before the memorial service. The audio rolled. Rachel's voice carried clearly. "Get the moment. I want the second she loses control." A few people shifted in their seats. Another audience member stood and walked out, hands tight at his sides. I let the silence breathe. I did not comment. The next slide held 2 frames side by side. My hands over a storage box on the left. A dented lamp dropping into a trash can on the right. The analyst narrated calmly. He highlighted the mismatched metadata. He showed the compression seams around the metal. He played the spectrogram that revealed spliced words. When the side-by-side clip ran, the lie became visible without adjectives. Whispers gathered like wind through a stand of trees. A pair of veterans rose and left, heads low. Others leaned forward, reading the QR codes on the program. The notarized files opened, and their faces changed as proofs loaded. I kept my shoulders square. My father taught me to let facts do the climbing. I spoke again, not to accuse, but to draw a line around what mattered. I said my father's Purple Heart was not a prop. It had been wounded into existence. It would never be used as a cudgel. I thanked the registrar and the analyst. Then I turned to the plaque and lifted the velvet cover. The metal caught the gymnasium lights. My father's name glowed. A man in a Korea War cap called out, "General, why not sue them tonight?" I answered plainly, "The court is already in motion. Tonight is not for victory laps. It is for setting the record straight." A woman near the aisle argued that families should stay private. I agreed, then said privacy was violated the moment a camera aimed to manufacture shame. Near the back, Dana stood with eyes. She did not wave. She did not need to. I closed with one sentence. Honor is quiet until you force it to speak. Then it speaks like this. The room held still. Some faces were stern, some softened. A few remained skeptical. That is the cost of daylight. It cannot choose who squints. When it ended, I stepped down from the stage and placed my palm on the plaque. I felt steadier than I had in weeks. I heard shoes on the floor behind me, not a rush, just measured steps. I did not turn. Whether they were leaving in protest or approaching with apologies did not change the fact that the evidence was public, preserved, and anchored to my father's name. The justice was not loud, but it was exact. And it was enough. After the ceremony, I waited in the quiet hall, collecting programs from the seats. My phone buzzed. Dana texted. Maybe she understood. Just too late. I asked what she meant. She wrote that Rachel sat in her car behind the building, silent. Dana asked me to meet her outside. In the lot, the air smelled like cold metal and pine. She stepped from her sedan with a small craft envelope and held it out. She gave me this, Dana said. She told me to bring it to you if you still wanted the truth more than a win. Inside was a flash drive and a folded note. The ink had softened in places, as if touched by water. The handwriting was hers. I read it under the sodium lights. I hired them. Mercer convinced me shame could level a tilted field. I was wrong. I will tell the court I was wrong. Use this. Do not protect me. Behind the note was a construction paper crown, purple, the kind Lily makes at the table. Across the band, a child had written one word: brave. I closed my eyes. Brave is not the same as blameless. Sometimes it is the first step into a storm you made yourself. I thanked Dana and asked her to text when she reached home. I called Ms. Hayes and drove straight to her office. She photographed the envelope, logged the chain of custody, and sealed the drive. A technician cloned it while we waited. The files were emails and invoices. Mercer coaching, subject lines that read narrative package and pressure points. Bank records linking the shell company to the Arlington firm. Payment schedules that matched the smear timeline. A memo labeling the viral clip as Phase 2. I did not cry. I felt something steadier, relief for Lily and for the part of Rachel that still knew the difference between power and repair. I wrote a short reply. I will tell the judge you cooperated. I will not tell Lily that you were a villain. I will let the record show what you did today. I did not send it. I slid it into the binder behind my father's yellow card. Driving home, the boulevard maples threw long bars of shade across the road. I thought of our backyard and the scrape of Rachel's chair the day she walked away from the table. Maybe tonight she moved it an inch. An inch is not absolution. It is a start. Starts matter. They do not erase harm. They change direction. My phone buzzed at a red light. Dana wrote, "She is at home with Lily. They are making crowns." I typed back. "Tell her the museum will keep the medals safe. Tell her Lily can visit them." I erased the message and set the phone face down. Some words belong in a courtroom. Some words belong in the very quiet space between sisters who are not ready to speak, but might be willing to begin someday. The ruling came on a gray Monday, the kind of morning that carries neither celebration nor dread, only the firm weight of consequence. I sat at the petitioner's table with Ms. Hayes, while the clerk shuffled papers and the judge adjusted his glasses. Rachel was across the aisle with counsel. Mercer sat 2 rows back. A representative from the Arlington firm occupied the end seat, expression blank. The judge spoke without theatrics. He adopted our exhibits in full. He accepted the chain of custody. He credited the museum logs. He found the authentication unimpeached. He summarized the memorial intervention as proportionate and orderly, undertaken to prevent the manipulation of grief for unlawful ends. Then he addressed the video. Our analyst returned to the stand and walked through the splice again. He explained spectral anomalies and compression artifacts. He traced mismatched timestamps and file hashes. The judge stated the point in a single sentence. The clip was manufactured to convey a false impression of contempt. The order followed in plain lines. A permanent injunction barred further publication of the doctored clip. A written retraction would be issued under the signatures of the individuals and entities that had seeded it. Monetary damages were awarded, but the amount meant less than the language that framed them. The court recognized a concerted campaign to manufacture instability and to weaponize grief. It recognized that the memorial had been targeted as a stage for humiliation. It recognized that my father's medals had been misrepresented as props in a story designed to harm a serving officer and a family. Then the gavel fell on referrals. the judge transmitted the record to the state bar for review of the firm's conduct. He sent Mercer's invoices and emails to the Inspector General for potential fraud and misuse of investigative resources. The court recommended that the district attorney consider charges related to unlawful surveillance and wire fraud. He granted our motion to seal my personnel records. He restored my standing in full and commended the museum for safeguarding the artifacts with care. The courtroom exhaled the way a crowded room does when a storm finally spends itself. I did not feel triumph. I felt repair. Tight stitches across a tear that never should have been made. When we stepped into the hallway, reporters clustered near the elevator bank, pens poised, cameras lowered. I offered one statement. The facts have been tested. The record stands. I will return to my duties. I did not mention Rachel by name. I did not need to. Outside, the sky broke slightly. A pale band of light edged the clouds. Mark joined me on the courthouse steps and handed me a certified copy of the order. He did not speak for a long moment. Then he said what mattered most. Your father would have approved of the method. Not the noise, the method. I folded the order and placed it in the binder next to the yellow card I carry for steadiness. Ms. Hayes walked out with a satisfied nod. Her work had been clean and careful, the kind that leaves little for rumor to hold. Behind us, Rachel exited with her attorney. She did not approach. She placed a hand on the rail. She looked toward the street. She left without turning her head. Dana texted that evening. Lily was at the kitchen table with paper crowns. Rachel was quiet. By week's end, the museum accepted the court's written findings for their archive. The Veterans Hall added a small note to the display. Artifacts preserved by family and community custodians. My father's name sat above the line. I touched the engraved letters and felt the steadiness of metal beneath my fingertips. I had regained the estate as the will intended. More importantly, I had regained the simple truth of who I am, independent of hashtags and edited frames. That night, I walked the perimeter of our yard, the way I do when I need to move my body into calm. The wind had a scent. The neighbor's porch light painted the grass in soft gold. I was not celebrating. I was breathing. Repair is quiet. It asks for patience. It holds. I held it. The envelope arrived 2 days later, thin and unremarkable, sliding through the mail slot with the circulars. I took it to the kitchen, opened it with a spoon, and found a single photograph of my father and me on a parade ground. My hand is raised in salute. His smile is small and proud. Taped to the back was a strip of printer paper with block letters. You won this round, but you are never truly alone. I stood very still. Threats do not always snarl. Sometimes they whisper through something you love. I slipped the photo into a clear sleeve and called Mark. He arrived with a field kit, gloves, bags, labels, and ultraviolet wand. We documented the envelope. We sealed it. We logged the time. Then I phoned the detective assigned to the surveillance case. She came with a patrol officer, took custody, and asked the right questions. Recent watchers, camera alerts, unexplained deliveries. I answered evenly. Ordinary details matter when someone wants to paint dread over your days. After they left, the street looked harmless. Children on scooters, a dog at a fence, a delivery truck rattling past. Ordinary as a disguise. That night we rotated codes, audited access logs, and changed the layered passwords that control the alarm and cameras. Mark walked the perimeter with a flashlight, checking the gate and the oak where a lens can miss a sliver of sidewalk. I brewed coffee and built a checklist. Notify the museum, brief Ms. Hayes, alert the Army liaison who monitors threats against senior officers. I was not afraid. I was awake. Fear is a spike. Vigilance is a posture you can hold. In the morning, the detective called. No usable prints, paper and ink common. She recommended a sweep for trackers and a temporary patrol pass. 2 technicians scanned for transmitters and anomalous signals. Nothing new. Relief and confirmation arrived together. The sender preferred suggestion over intrusion. I recognized the tactic. Influence operations often end with a nudge that makes the target police herself. I set the nudge aside like a tool I refused to touch. In the afternoon, I drove to the Veterans Hall and stood before the plaque. I traced the line that held my father's name and considered what the sender wanted. They wanted hesitation. They wanted me to step back from the work of repair and let suspicion do what slander could not. Instead, I sent the detective a brief update. Proceeding with public appearances. Routine unchanged except for common sense precautions. The power of a threat is the behavior it buys. I would not pay. On the way home, a black sedan tailed me for 3 lights, then turned off. I noted the plate, partial, no match in my memory. I eased my breathing, let the mirrors return to ordinary, and kept driving. I set the photograph on my desk and framed it with 2 paper crowns Lily had left on a visit. The message said, "You are never truly alone." I translated it this way: "You stand in the company you keep." My father keeps me company, so does the record we have built. So does the quiet discipline that refuses to be steered by shadows. I opened my notebook and drafted a short statement to file if the sender stepped into the light. Precise facts, dates, chain of custody. Nothing that a rumor could chew. The envelope had aimed at my pulse. It missed. My pulse belongs to the work ahead, to the repairs already made, and to the knowledge that vigilance can be steady without surrendering to fear. I keep my father's purple heart where light finds it in late afternoon. When the sun slides across the desk, the metal catches a pale flare that moves like breath. I do not touch it often. I do not need to. It is not a charm. It is a sentence I repeat until it steadies me. Honor is a choice you keep choosing. The court spoke. The museum preserved. The Veterans Hall hung his name in bronze. Those are structures, necessary, strong. But the work of keeping faith belongs to the living, to the quiet of a kitchen at dawn, to the decision not to answer a provocation in kind, to the promise you keep when no one would blame you for breaking it. I think about Rachel at the table with Lily and the paper crowns. I think about Dana crossing a parking lot with an envelope that changed a year. I do not create saints from harm. I do not pretend the damage was small. I measure it honestly, then choose not to build a second damage out of bitterness. My father once said courage is not a roar. It is a steady step across a room where you are needed. I take that step by writing down what happened, dates, sources, the lines that hold a story true. I take it by standing before the plaque and letting silence count as speech. If the sender of the envelope believes I will live as a chaste thing, they misread me. I will live as a keeper, of records, of promises, of the boundary between justice and revenge. Revenge is a sharp tool. It satisfies little and breaks in your hand. Justice is slower. It holds. I can wait for it because I know what I'm waiting for. Tomorrow I will drive to the museum and sign custody of a scanned photograph that shows my father in profile, eyes forward. In the evening I will cook something simple and set an extra plate on the counter. It is my way of keeping him near. Grief remains. So does gratitude. So does work. The metal rests in its case. The light crosses. My breath returns to an even count. This is how I keep the promise he placed in my 10-year-old hand. To guard what deserves guarding, and to walk forward with a steady heart. The cemetery sits on a low hill where the wind carries the smell of pine and cut grass. I parked beneath the old elm and walked the path I have walked since I was a girl, when my father would bring flowers for men he served beside. The new granite is still pale. The letters of his name are sharp, as if the stone is still learning how to hold them. I took a small purple heart lapel pin from a felt pouch. The original metal remains in the museum vault. This little pin is my stand-in. I rested the pin at the base of the headstone and laid my palm against the granite. The stone was cool. My breath steamed in the morning air. I lowered my head and spoke as if the wind itself were the messenger. I kept my voice steady. The words were simple. I whispered. I kept it. The sentence meant many things. I kept the metal safe. I kept our name clean. I kept faith with the training that taught me not to fight in anger. I kept the promise you placed in my hand when I was 10, and you said courage is a choice you repeat. I stood that way for a long minute until the wind thinned and the sun cleared the clouds. A groundskeeper passed with a rake and nodded without intruding. 2 older veterans paused at a nearby plot. One lifted 2 fingers in a quiet salute. I returned the gesture and stayed where I was. Noise has traveled through our family like weather. Today I wanted the opposite. Quiet that arrives and stays because someone invited it to remain. I told my father about the hearing, about the registrar from the museum who protected the chain of custody like a priest protects the chalice, about the judge who let facts do the speaking, about the veterans who watched the side-by-side comparisons and saw the seam where falsehood was stitched. I told him I felt relief rather than triumph, repair rather than victory, and that repair fits me better than celebration ever could. I also told him about Lily, about the paper crown she made with silver stars, about the way children repeat what they are given, about how I promised never to let her be used as a tool. I told him that Rachel sent an envelope that helped the court find the truth. I did not hide the harm she caused. I did not decorate it either. I set it next to the repair the way you set bandages next to scars. A small bouquet leaned against the headstone, gladiolus and rosemary. I tucked the felt pouch beneath the flowers and straightened the flag in its metal holder. The breeze lifted the edge and dropped it again. A small, faithful heartbeat. I breathed with it. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. The drill I use when a room needs my steadiness more than my voice. When I stepped back, I saw my boots in the dew, dark ovals that would fade in an hour. The imprint comforted me. It meant I had been present, that I took responsibility for being present, that grief and duty can share the same ground without argument. I traced the letters of his name with my fingertip, not enough to polish them, just enough to feel the groove. On the way to the car, the groundskeeper called after me. "Ma'am, the pin will be safe here. We keep our eyes on things." I thanked him and told him where the real metal lives, how the vault will outlast all of us, and how the story matters more than the metal itself. He smiled and said that stories are why people visit. Metal only gives their hands a place to rest. I understood. I looked once more at the headstone before driving away. The hill held its simple geometry. Rows of names, shared silence, a flag above them all. My father had taught me that honor is not noise, it is posture. The posture I choose today is steadiness. The words I carry away are still the same. I kept it. I did not drive straight home from the cemetery. I took the long way through the neighborhood where we grew up, past the maple that once shaded our backyard. The house belongs to another family now. I slowed the car and let the scene stand. A version of us once stood here still. Forgiveness is too large a word to lift in one day. I am not ready to forgive Rachel. That is not cruelty. It is accuracy. Still, I'm done carrying the heat that tried to burn my sleep. I will not let anger be the architect of my calendar. Justice has moved. Orders are written. The museum holds the logs. I can let go of the reflex to explain myself in every room. At home, I brewed tea and sat at the kitchen table. I wrote 2 columns, damage and repair. Under damage, I listed the smear, the hotel payment, the staged clip, the way Lily was used as a courier for a lie. Under repair, I listed the injunction, the retraction, the archive, the quiet truth that now walks on its own legs. The columns did not balance. They rarely do. But the second column had weight. It will keep growing if I feed it. I placed the page at the back of the binder and moved the binder to a shelf. I am not throwing away vigilance. I am refusing to worship it. There is a line between readiness and obsession. Soldiers learn it early. I thought of Rachel in her kitchen with Lily and the crowns. I can picture her hands cutting ribbon, her face tired. I am not responsible for her healing. I am responsible for my boundary. I will answer the court when it calls. I will answer Lily when she asks about her grandfather. I will not answer rumors. After tea, I walked the yard and checked the gate. The air smelled like rain, though the sky stayed clear. That scent reminds me that weather inside a person can differ from the sky above. I said a small prayer for the part of Rachel that brought the envelope, for the part that believed truth could still be chosen. I did not grant absolution, I granted room. Room is where growth happens. I called my therapist and extended our standing appointment. Leadership does not cancel care once the crisis passes. Leadership widens the path. We spoke about letting justice be what it is, not vengeance in a suit, but a structure that allows ordinary life to resume. Sometimes the most radical sentence is, "I am going to sleep." That night I left the porch light on and read a chapter from a book my father loved. The words were steady. They made a shelter. I set the book aside and wrote a letter I may never send. I told Rachel I would not oppose leniency if she keeps cooperating. That accountability and mercy can share a bench if the facts are honored. That Lily deserves parents who choose repair in public and in private. I sealed the letter and put it with the yellow card. Before bed, I stood at the window and watched the street. A neighbor carried groceries. A boy wheeled a bin to the curb. A dog chased a moth. Ordinary life does not ask for a speech. It asks for presence. I turned off the light and let the house rest. Justice will keep its own watch. My task is to release the rope I have been pulling and trust that not everything needs my hands all the time. I slept, not perfectly, but honestly. The next evening, a dark sedan paused at the curb outside our house. It idled beneath the streetlight while the engine note settled in my chest. Mark stepped onto the porch and met my eyes. I shook my head and stayed where I was. The car crept forward, reversed once, then rolled away as if the driver wanted the pause observed rather than feared. I did not follow. I set my hands on the rail and counted my breath. Vigilance is not panic. It is measured attention. The cameras captured the plate and time. We sent the clip to the detective and locked the door. Inside, the house felt like itself again. Light on the table, a book lying open,